technologic innovations today.
And you don't have to pay.
Expert panels with advanced degrees are sure to satisfy your curiosity.
Since we mention it's free.
And if you think you'll find a better time than this, then come on down and test your hypothesis. Cause you're gonna learn a lot if you wanna stay down at the Science Cafe.
Thanks for being here, everybody. The Science Cafe tonight is about spirits and the distillation process. Alcohol is always a big draw here. My name's Rick Irving, so I'll be the moderator for tonight. The format for this is pretty simple. We'll do some introductions, some introductory comments, and then it's going to be questions and answers until we run out of time or run out of questions. The two panelists we have here are pretty involved in the industry. Well, you can see here. And we're going to have samples, right? Absolutely. Samples, too. Yeah. Okay, so we have Andy Day, who's here, and he's the co-founder of the Doire, is that what it's called? Doire Distillery in Derry. He attended Montserrat College in Beverly? Yes. Excellent. And in painting, artistry, sketching, that sort of stuff?
I used to be an artist.
Okay.
And now I'm a drunk.
What drink? Okay. Let's see, what else we have here? Early 2012, you purchased the Drinkery was that also in Derry?
Londonderry, under the formerly known as Tupelo Music Hall.
Ah, okay, good. 2013, Andy and Alana took their Drinkery experience and opened up the Cask and Wine.
Cask and Vine, yes.
Cask and Vine, that's what it says here.
Yes, sir, yes.
Okay. And so, if you would just take a few minutes and let everybody know who you are and what you do, and
sure. Thanks for having me tonight, and thanks for being here, guys. This is my first panel in this nature, so I'm super excited to be here. My name is Andy Day. As I was just introduced, my venture into craft alcohol in this state started as many people divorce. So that was pretty awesome. But that led me to the Drinkery. It was a cute little bottle shop underneath the Tupelo Music Hall. Back in 2010, I purchased it with a then friend, now wife, and we opened up Cask and Vine, which is a craft beer bar, which I know seems kind of crazy in this day and age, but back in the day, craft beer wasn't as readily available as it is now. So we opened that up. And then it was, I think, 2018, we opened up Doire Distilling. We were fortunate to be surrounded by a number of other craft breweries, and a distillery was not something that Derry had ever seen, and it was certainly not anything that was nearby. The nearest location would be my friend Andre's place over here, Live Free Distilling. So we thought that would be kind of a cool, unique thing for Derry. And that's kind of what we've been doing. We've kind of run the gamut. We've done rum, we've done gin, we've done whiskeys, tequila, you name it. Well, agave spirit. We don't want the drug lords coming up here. Oh, feds. Yes, yeah, for the feds. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. And then have after that we opened up a brewery, and we also do wine now as well. So we're always thirsty.
All right, thank you. Great use of the mic there. By the way, that reminded me, I should make the announcement. We're filming this tonight. We always do. So if you would wait for your questions till either Dan Marchek or I come over to you and give you the mic, hold it close to your mouth, because we want to get it recorded on the video there, and we also want to make sure everybody in here hears your questions. So if you just get a hold of Dan or me, we'll come over to you and let you ask your questions. Now we have André Marcoux. He started the Live Free Distillery 3 years ago?
Opened the doors end of 2018.
18, okay, so 4 years ago. And this is pretty interesting what I saw on your website. Flavored moonshine, small batch bourbon, single malt whiskey, rum, and back road corn whiskey.
Yes.
Nice. So what drives you to come up with all these things?
kind of necessity and seeing what people like and what they don't like.
Interesting.
And yeah, just trying different things to see what people like. Like with Andy doing the agave spirit. Andy's actually the only one in the state that actually creates an agave spirit here in the state. So that's pretty awesome. So
Nice. Okay. And so the Live Free Distillery, it's only 4 years old, but it's got some very prestigious awards here.
Yep. We've entered in competitions, and I'm sure Andy can attest to this, that the competitions aren't really the greatest thing to get into. But yes, we've gotten New Hampshire's 2021 Whiskey Distillery of the Year by the New York International Spirits Competition. And we got Best Distillery in the State by Best of the 603 2 years running, 2021 and 2022.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. In Manchester. Yep.
Okay, and there's a topic that we'll see if André wants to talk about. He got into this by accident. We'll see where that goes.
So to give you a little background about me, I got into doing distillation by accident. My wife now, girlfriend at the time, made me find a hobby because of what I was doing for work. I was working for a steel supply house in Manchester, and busy time of year there was from November to May because big thing was taking care of all the repairs and maintenance for the sand and gravel and asphalt plants. And that's when they're shut down because they're not paving roads, they're not crushing any rock. So that was our name to fame, was taking care of all the sand and gravel and asphalt plants throughout New England. And I worked there for close to 20 years. And during my time there, I grew through the ranks and eventually became right underneath the owner. So it was the owner, then me, then the controller, and everyone else. So because of that, it was a lot of responsibility, a lot of added stress, because we were working 16 to 18-hour days, November to May. The only days we got off was Christmas Day, Thanksgiving, and New Year's. So it got to be quite a bit, but it made a lot of money. But the wife said, you got to find a hobby, or our girlfriend said, you got to find a hobby or I'm going to leave you. So I was thinking about making beer, but I drink a lot of beer, so would have been bad. She drinks wine, so that could have been fun, but it probably would have been bad. We don't partake in the spirits too often, so I was thinking, let's get into this. So I stole one of her stock pots, a stainless bowl, and made a homemade still and did my first run underneath my deck with the turkey fryer. And I proved the concept, the theory of distillation. Wasn't the smartest decision of my life because there was vapor spewing with an open flame, and we know that's bad. But I was able to perfect it and do it. So I gave her the option of let me turn the basement into a small craft distillery, or we're going to turn it into a grow center. She chose the lesser of two evils, but we look back at it thinking maybe we should have went the other route because we probably made a lot more money. But here we are. And then, so that was 2008, 2009. And I've been trying to get into starting my own craft distillery for the longest time. And working at the metal fabrication place, I was able to actually build my stills. I designed and built them, and that's the reason why I have it, because I saved all my money because I was able to do that stuff and have the background to do that. And yeah, I opened my doors in 2018 and creating all different kinds of stuff for people to try, whether you like whiskeys, rums, vodkas, moonshines. The only thing I will not create is gin, because that was my one thing in college. Everyone has their own thing. Mine was gin, and that's the one we cannot distill there. No. So.
Yeah, mine was Jack Daniels. I fell asleep under the sink. Every time I got up, I whacked my head down and went back to sleep. So I think we're all set, unless you have some more to add. That was a good synopsis of your background.
No, I'm pretty good.
Okay, in that case, we're going to open it up to questions. As I said, we're going to stick with the questions and till time runs out or questions run out. So do we have any? Dan? Dan Marchek? Yeah.
Over here. Hello, over here. So when you go to the New Hampshire liquor store, it's a little expensive these days, so have you guys been able to keep your price points down? And do you have any comment about why it's $30 and $50 now for the same products that they've been distilling for all these years and such? Do you have any comment on that from the economic standpoint?
Just with everything in this world, it's supply and demand. For instance, grain, for some types of grain, they've doubled in the last 2 years. I'm sure Andy has seen it. So I hate to say it, but we're not going to eat that cost. Just like the big guys aren't going to eat that cost. Everything's got to be passed down. The supply of glass bottles is totally ridiculous. I've waited 4 months to get a pallet of bottles when they said it'll be in 2 weeks. 2 weeks came and gone, and had to call again. Oh, another 2 weeks, and it just kept going and going and going. I don't know if you have anything to add.
It sounds like you have the same supplier I have.
Yes, we all use the same suppliers.
Yeah, I don't know. Are you speaking specifically to American whiskey, or are you talking about imported stuff, or something in between?
Yeah, really just with the American products I was most interested in.
Okay.
Because I know all the shipping is, even crazier. But
Sure. Yeah. No. I would definitely. I would agree with André. The cost of raw materials has gone up significantly. I mean, you're seeing hikes across the board from wineries to distilleries to breweries right now, and it sucks obviously because, we don't want to do that, but we have to do that. I know that there were certain taxes levied on imported stuff. I've watched, from the restaurant side, a lot of the premium scotches and things that we would have gone up. Like Balvenie 14 Caribbean cask was something that was like $54 a bottle when we brought that in, and that was like 5 years ago, and now it's like 85 or something stupid. So yeah, it's like obviously the cost of goods is going up overseas as well, so that accompanied with taxes is just not great. But I think if you're talking about American spirits, the cost of everything's got cooperage. You talk about oak barrels. And the cost of wood has gone up. The cost of labor has gone up. So everything is just more expensive, and unfortunately, that trickles down.
Robert Samochi.
Thank you. You had me at Balvenie. So distillation is obviously the process using distill. The question I want to ask is, if you can tell us, both of you, the process prior to getting to the still. What raw materials do you use? What do you use to, the starting point? How much of it does actually come from New Hampshire? How much is locally grown? And then how do you decide how to use the raw materials to start the distillation process? Like, what are you distilling?
Yeah. So I guess it all depends on what you're making. The more locally you can source something, generally the less expensive it is to a certain extent. A huge piece of what we do, for example, I brought gin today. Sorry, André. I was like, he's got whiskey and bourbon. He doesn't need to taste any of that. He should have gin. So our base spirit is sugar cane. So, talking about the cost of goods, when we first got started in 2018, a 50-pound bag of sugar was probably half what it is right now. So I'm trying to keep your questions in line, Rob. A lot of what we're doing and the cost of things and it depends on what we're making. We've tried to stick with sugarcane because it's one of the cheaper ingredients that we can use. It allows us to control costs a little bit. Malt, we're kind of at the mercy of our purveyors and what they can do. we do try and work with local if we can. There's a great main malt company that we've used in the brewery side. They're not so much on the distillery side, but if we can do that, we try and do that with specialty malts, things like that for flavoring. Can you repeat your question? I feel like you had a couple pieces, and I want to make sure I hit.
I just want to talk about the process, or ask you guys about the process prior to getting to distill.
Yes, okay.
So, you take your raw materials, what do you do with it? What's being distilled? I mean, I know that at one point you've distilled a beer, but that's not what you're doing all the time. So are you using like sugarcane for all of your things, some of it? What else are you using?
Sure.
What are the various things?
Yeah. So something like the sugarcane process is super easy. It's one of my favorite things to do because it doesn't require any brain power. Essentially, you're looking for a specific gravity. I've found that I like somewhere around a 12% wash is about where I want to be. And when I say wash, I mean we're creating sugar water that we're fermenting. When we do the sugar shine wash, just sugar, we're shooting for a 12%. We're putting hot water and sugar together, blending it and making sure everything is dissolved, and then we're pitching yeast on it. So that's something that's super easy. When you're talking about a malt whiskey, that's a little bit different. That to me is where the fun part comes in, because you get to start talking about how much base malt do we need. Everybody knows what base malt is? Base malt, okay. So a base malt is, it's like the raw ingredient that it's like the bulk of your sugar content. So basically, to create alcohol, you have sugar and you have yeast that eats it and it creates alcohol. So a base malt is just like in beer. It's the raw energy. It's the power that creates the alcohol. And then, in addition to that, you have specialty malts. You have, your chocolate malt, and you have, your rye, and you have just lots of different flavor profiles from different malts. So you get to play a lot before you go through the distillation process and kind of figure out, what do I need for raw? Like, I need alcohol out of this thing, but what am I trying to achieve flavor-wise? So then you start talking about adding in, different pieces of these specialty malt to create these different flavors. And that is very much like the brewing process, where you have milled your grain and you have your giant pot and you steep your grain, and you're basically converting this into sugars, and then you run that sugar water off, and what you would normally do in the brewing process is you would boil it, add your hops, and then you'd cool it down and put it in your fermenter. Sorry, my phone's blowing up. It's the kids looking for Christmas presents. I'm serious. So in the distillation process, when beforehand you do the mash-in process where you steep your grains and you have your base malt, you have your specialty malt, whatever it is that you're looking to do, or your sugar, and then you cool that down and send it into the fermenter. You don't bother with the boil part. You just pitch yeast on that thing and just let it rip. So that's kind of, I guess that's kind of like a quick overview of what happens before we get to the distillation process. It's a matter of playing with flavor concepts and the different types of malt that you use, or at least, I do a lot of malt whiskey. That's kind of what we do. And then, like I said, the sugar thing, you're basically just fermenting sugar. Agave, same thing. It's a nectar that you cut down to be a certain amount of sugar content, and then you pitch yeast on that. I had a conversation with another mutual friend of ours, CJ from Steadfast Spirits, and he's like, man, you should see the stuff they do down in the South when they're creating rum. They don't clean those vats. They don't do anything. They empty it, they distill it, and then they just throw a bunch of crap back in it, and he's like, and that's why it's so good. I'm like, there's something to this, actually. It's funny because I assume that some of you folks you were at the previous Science Cafe, and you were talking about beer. And beer, you need to be on point with cleanliness and sanitize all over the place. And I'm not saying that we don't do that in distilling, but my God, the stuff that you can get away with distilling is crazy. This is to you, sir.
So going to Andy's point about the cleanliness, if brewers come to distilleries and see what we do, they are appalled. They really are. They're amazed at what we can get away with compared to how beer needs to be created. But going back to the ingredients and New Hampshire ingredients, for myself, certain grains, there's not a lot of farmers in New Hampshire that are actually creating specific grains for the brewing process or the distillation process. There's one farm in Concord where they grow some grains that actually get shipped to a malt house down in Massachusetts. And then there's another distillery in New Hampshire called Flag Hill. Their distillery and winery. They've turned over, and the new owner has transitioned into growing all his grains. Excuse me. So he's a true farm distillery where he's trying to create all his raw ingredients. And out of all of us, there's only 14, 15 distilleries in the state, maybe more. I forget how many there are. We're not that many compared to the breweries or the wineries, but he's the only distillery, and I don't think there's any brewery in the state that actually does that also. I personally, there's 3 big players to order grain from. There's one called Country Malt. There's another one called BSG, where we can all order grain, but with the cost increases of that, plus the shipping cost, I've actually started reaching out to these closer malt houses. There's one in Massachusetts called Valley Malt, and there's one in Maine that Andy was talking about called Blue Ox, where the grain prices might be a little bit more, but the shipping cost is so much cheaper. So that's where I've transitioned. So right now, a lot of my grain that I use is coming directly New Hampshire, Mass, and lower New York, whereas before I was getting a lot of my grain from upstate New York and Canada. So, and yes, it is really fun being able to mess with different grains because it'll give you such a different flavor profile. Right now I have 5 different barrel-aged whiskeys, and every single one is totally different, just because of changing the percentage of a grain or swapping out a grain from a rye to a wheat and going really heavy on a wheat. It changes the profile so drastically. It's pretty unbelievable what grain can actually do. And then the yeast aspect, I actually do a custom blended yeast for my whiskeys. So I don't just use one type of yeast. I use multiple yeast to get that special profile that I'm looking for. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
So I'm curious. A lot of breweries and stuff you see will have like pilot systems to experiment with stuff. But I know the losses from like wash to actual finished product is huge. So do you guys actually have like a pilot system that you like mess around with small scale stuff and experiment, or is it like all in and you're making like what you guys would consider like a full batch of experimental stuff?
So when I was doing this as a hobby, I did a lot of experimental stuff. So a lot of the stuff I make now, I've made in the past. But now it's legal. So I've had the practice of doing that, but some of the stuff that I just took a chance saying, hey, I'm going to do this, and if it turns out great, great. If not, someone will like it because it'll be different. That's how I do it now. So I don't know about you, Andy.
Yeah. No, I'm totally down with what André said. Gunslinger. Boom, this is what we're doing, and it's going to be great. But also, so one of the things I wanted to do, I'm a visual person, and wanted to kind of have something to show everyone who is going to be here tonight so they have an idea of kind of what our process looks like. This is actually our test batch still. We will have some ideas where it's like, for example, we wanted to do canned cocktails. And there's a lot of canned cocktails out there right now, and we didn't want to do these.
I have questions for you afterwards.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, no, I'm happy.
This has to do with the state more than anything else.
They're terrible. Unless you're from the state tonight, and thanks for coming in. We wanted to do, at the restaurant, we wanted to test an idea. We wanted to see if we could do cocktails on tap, and part of that was to expedite doing drink service. And one of the drinks that we pour the hell out of is a lemon drop. And I wasn't prepared to do a full production size thing with a lemon drop, but I had an idea. And I was thinking, you know what? If we took our base spirit, our sugar shine, and we had distilled it twice over, so it was very clean. A lot of the sweetness was gone, and it was just a base spirit. Thinking, you know what, if we take a whole bunch of fresh lemons and we throw them into the wash, so we basically take our sugar shine that's 170 proof, we dilute it down to about 25% alcohol content with water in the still, the big still, and then we throw in a whole bunch of lemons, and then we use our gin basket, which hangs over the liquid, so that when the alcohol vapors come up through, it grabs a hold of the flavors of whatever's sitting in the basket, and it translates into the liquid. We're like, this might be a super fast, easy way to do a lemon drop, to have super fresh, real lemon flavor without having to sit there and wring lemons out every day, without having to sit there and make it to order. And the only thing that we need to do is dilute it down with some sugar water, because that's basically what a lemon drop is. Not wanting to, so our still, I should have probably said, our still is 125 gallons still, which sounds like a lot, but it's not, because you're not getting a ton of distillate off of that by the time you get done with 125 gallons. If you've got 12 gallons, awesome. So if I have an idea like that, I don't want to have 11 gallons of something that might be good. Maybe we can use it. So that's where we'll use this little guy here. I should mention that it's illegal to distill alcohol in any state in this country without an actual license from the feds. So that said, you could certainly purchase one of these online if you wanted to, and you could distill water if you wanted to.
It's not illegal to own a still.
It is not illegal to own a still. No. As far as productions, like there's a few different types of whiskey that I would like to do on the small scale before investing the money in, especially now where everything has just gone up so astronomically. I'd really like to see what a Belgian triple tastes like distilled. I feel like that would be amazing. And on the brewery side, we make a Belgian triple. So what I'd like to do is take 8 gallons of Belgian triple, put it in this thing and see what happens, and then go from there, rather than making 125 plus gallons and then here's hoping.
So, yeah. Andy, regarding your Belgian triple, I did do that during the sanitizer days. Oh. So it made great sanitizer.
I guess we won't be drinking the Belgian triple.
Any other questions?
So one of the things we know from following a handful of distillation processes and stuff is you guys go through like the heads, then the main body, then the tails. How do you determine when it's done? Because it's not like the liquid's suddenly like blue and now it's clear, or there's no like line, or the spirit doesn't scream at you, hey, it's time to switch over. So how do you guys determine when it's ready to actually run the main body and when it's time to cut it down?
So everyone has different theories about this. What I say for that is that's where the artistry of craft distillation comes in. Because if I were to go to Andy's place and run his equipment, or if he came to my place and ran my equipment, because every piece of distillation you use is a little different, I may choose a different spot to make that cut compared to what he would do. So that's the artistry, because in a whiskey distillation, you get overlap between your heads and your hearts and your tails. All right. Whereas, say, a vodka run, since it's such a high proof, everything's so concentrated, that's very easy to know when to make those cuts. In a vodka run, when it starts getting into the tails or the end of the run, it'll start tasting and smelling like wet dog or wet cardboard. It's very unpleasant, but you can drink it. I don't recommend it, but it's very unpleasant. But to make the cuts, that's the artistry of craft distillation. It's a little bit easier for us to make those cuts than the bigger guys, because the bigger guys, we're doing say 4 to 8 gallons an hour if we're lucky. The big guys on their big stills, like Jameson, when they're running their big stills, they're pumping out like 200 gallons an hour. All right, so there's a reason why in my mind, certain alcohols are priced the way they are for a certain reason, because they are letting more of those tails go in. And in the tails process, there's a lot of more fusel oils and conagers that collect in the tails, which looks like an oily substance on the top surface. And that's where you can get your hangover from, or not drinking enough water and drying out your brain. That's what that's from.
I've personally found, Josh, that there's certain telltales with my equipment anyway, where I know, okay, this is where we're at right now. Obviously, the still gets to a certain temperature, it starts putting off distillate, and so I brought this parrot. We usually use this to proof the whiskey or whatever it is that we're doing before we start bottling it, but we have something similar that's attached to our still, and we have basically an alcohol meter, which I brought somewhere around here as well, and yeah. So what'll happen is, as the liquor starts to fill this smash, this will start to kind of poke its head up, and it'll give us an idea of what the proof is on the alcohol, and it starts running off. And kind of watching that, you already know that the first bit of your run is going to end up being bad stuff. I actually brought some bad stuff too, because it's probably important in case anybody decides that they want to distill alcohol, which is illegal. At least you have an idea of what it smells like. It smells like nail polish remover. So you see that come up, and you have this sort of base of this is what the proof is, while the run starts. And I've found that it gets to a certain point where you get in the transition period from heads into hearts, and the proof starts to drop a bit, and that's where the flavor changes and everything. You kind of get an idea. So for me, there's math that you can do. There's formulas out there that say if you have a wash that is a certain alcohol percentage and a certain volume, and you're heating it to a certain temperature, yada, yada, yada. This is the science piece of it. Yada, 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 science, math, whatever. That you should get a certain amount of 4 shots. That's the real bad stuff that will kill you. That's the stuff that comes off first. Then you get into the heads. That won't kill you immediately, but will eventually kill you or make you blind. So when they say you're drinking moonshine, you're going to go blind, that's the bad stuff. Then you run into the hearts or the middles. That's the good stuff that you want. And then the tails. And as André said, the tails isn't necessarily poisonous, but it doesn't necessarily taste as good. The only point to keeping tails would be if you wanted to throw it into another wash and run it again, and or if maybe you're doing some barrel aging, sometimes tails can be beneficial. Anyway, when we get to so let's say, for example, the sugar shine wash. If I've got a pristine, clean still, and I have a 12% sugar shine wash, and I start running that, it's probably going to start off immediately in the 4 shots at about 190 proof for my still. And then it's going to move into the heads, and it's going to drop down into about 180 proof. And then once it starts to get to about, I'll sit there, and over the course of, a couple of gallons comes out of this thing. It starts to drop and drop, and then it gets to about 170. That's the point where I start sticking my finger in there, and I taste it. And that's where, André talked about, this is where craft is a little bit different than production, big boys, where we're right there making the decision. When is this no longer beneficial. Like I want as much as I can get out of this, but also I want to make sure that my spirit is that much more quality than anything else that's coming out commercially, because we're small, so we need to make every bit of difference as possible and make sure that our stuff is that much better. So for me, it's taste. And then throughout the distillation process, it'll run for hours and hours. It'll do its thing. And then slowly as it goes, you have to increase the heat because there's less alcohol in your wash. So you have to drive it that much harder in order to get that much more out of it. You start to see the proof drop. And then that's also another craft piece where it's like, okay, what's the acceptable thing? What am I doing here? Am I creating something that should be vodka? Probably shouldn't let that drop. I should just cut that and be done. If I want to get another container and collect the rest of what's there, and I want to throw that into the next wash, if I'm going to do the same thing and I want to, try and squeeze as much as I can out of it, cool. If I'm doing a whiskey, I may let it run a little bit. I may say, you know what? I know it's been collecting at 150 proof for the last 3 hours, and now it's 140, 130. Maybe I'm going to let that ride just a little bit longer, knowing it's not the top quality spirit that I want, but it's going to go sit in a barrel for the next year and a half. So I want what's going to happen with that. I don't know if that answers your question. It's kind of like for me, it's very hands-on. It's as soon as the key points for me when I'm distilling is when it gets to the point where it starts putting off distillate, I want to make sure I'm present, make sure everything is doing its thing, everything's cooling, and we don't have vapors, because that's bad. That's some scary stuff. We tell stories about that. But and then, okay, good. Now I know I probably have about 45 minutes before I have to pay attention again, because then that's going to be the point where, okay, now I need to start checking to see, is this thing ready to start putting off the good distillate? Because I don't want to lose any of that, but I also don't want any heads. And then I'll sit there and I will just pace back and forth and wait and wait and wait and taste and taste and taste. And then get to the point where it's like, okay, I'll even go to I'll get a shot glass. I'll take some of the distillate. I'll put some water in it, and then I'll smell it, and I'll be like, okay, is this the whiskey that I want or not? And then we make the switch. We actually start capturing stuff, and then it's another several hours before it's like, okay, now we need to pay attention again. Where do we want to make the cut here? Does that answer your? A little bit. Yeah. Okay, a little bit.
It just kind of seems like one of those arbitrary things. I don't know if there was something in particular you guys look for, and I get that it's like, a very craft thing, like very,
So it also depends on what you're making too, because a whiskey run is going to be totally different than a vodka run. Same thing with, I've never done an agave run, so I can't say how that would do. But the first time you get a still and the first time you run it, I'd say maybe half a dozen times, you're there constantly checking it until you get comfortable with it. And then, you get it going, check it. All right, I'll be back in an hour, because you're comfortable with it. You know what your equipment can do also, because every piece is different. Because Andy has one still that he runs for production. I actually have two stills. I have one that I use for doing what's known as stripping runs, which is just separating the alcohol from that wash, and then a smaller still for doing spirits run. And both of those run totally different, and they're very similar in how they've been designed. So,
Next question.
Question back here
Dan?
in
Okay.
your left.
Thanks. I'm curious, a couple of years ago, I haven't visited distilleries much lately, but they had said that the biggest impediment for them getting into it was that they could not get equipment. They had to order their stills from Germany, and that you just couldn't get anything in the U.S. And so besides making your own, which ought to be really interesting because it's kind of complicated, how difficult is it to get something of any decent size that makes it worth your while? And is it really heavily regulated? Are you getting it from overseas? Or how do you even get into the equipment, the stills?
To answer your question, I got to ask Andy a question first. Before you did it with the licensing with the feds in the state, were you partaking at home hobby also?
No.
Okay. So going to what you're talking about, I want to say about 15 years ago is 15 to 12 years ago, there was pretty much only one still manufacturer in the United States. That company is called Vendum Copper Works. Their big thing, their whole thing is doing all this crazy industrial type stuff, and they ended up doing a subdivision of their company creating stills, and they make beautiful, beautiful pieces of equipment, but it was years because they only had so many employees creating stuff. Now the demand's gotten higher. There are companies overseas in Germany. You can get some out of Sweden. China has always been a big manufacturer of brewing equipment, winery equipment, distillation equipment, and there's people here in the U.S. that are brokers that just sell their stuff and make a little bit on it. But now there's a lot more American companies getting involved. So there is a company. There's a few companies here in New Hampshire that do it. I would recommend them for home hobby essential oil distillation, but not for big commercial equipment. But there's one company in Maine that they make a really quality product. They're called Trident Stills. And then there's Abe, which is a brewery manufacturer that got into doing distillation equipment because they saw the amount of people actually wanting to open up a distillery and get into the distillery, because it definitely is the next big thing, where how craft beer was 20 years ago or however long ago it really took off. I don't know exactly. You would know more than me.
I think 10, but
10 years.
I don't know how old you are.
Well, I'm just going off of Pete.
Yeah.
So now it is a lot easier to get equipment. Doesn't mean that equipment's going to be quality equipment, because our friend CJ, who owns a distillery in Concord, he got equipment from a reputable still supplier that gets their equipment from China. A lot of the stuff has not been that good. He had problems. There's another distillery way up north called Cathedral Ledge. Brand new facility. Everything brand new. Everything came in with minor things that were not right. He had parts on his still that were leaking, and it was supposed to be all TIG welded. And he ended up finding out using a self-tapping screw to plug a hole worked fine. Oh, yeah, there's some horror stories out there. Tell you that right now.
Okay, next question is over here.
Hi, I'm just wondering the tasting process from like creation of I want to make this thing taste like this, and then once it comes out, how is it that you how is it that not so much that you change it, but how is it that you are in tune to what people want to drink, possibly before they even know they want it?
Let me tell you about people for a minute. No. I guess part of it, again, we're tiny. We're just a tiny little craft distillery, and what we try and do is make things that we want to drink. And I think if you talk to any winemaker or any brewer, the stuff that they're making, by and large, is the stuff that they want to drink at the end of the day. So I guess, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think a lot of people, so let's say, for example, gin. We have 5 different gins that we've done. This one that I brought happens to be my favorite. And that was sort of a trial and error throughout our gin making process, getting an idea of how do flavors work with whatever your base wash is, what that's made out of, what are you adding to that process that creates certain flavors, and then you sit there and you taste it and like, okay, this is where we got from where we started. It's kind of like baking, I guess. It's like you have an idea for a flavor profile for a cake, and you put a bunch of ingredients in, you bake it, and then you're like, okay, this is kind of what I wanted, but I wanted more of this. I wonder if I add more of this or I subtract some of this if I'm getting closer to where I want. So I guess for me in the way that we operate, it's sort of, I want to make what I want to drink, and I am going to do everything I can to play around with what we have to get there. And then, when it goes to market, we have always been very much about the stories behind whatever it is that we're selling. So before we got into any kind of production and we had our beer store, we had our restaurant, and we had certain beers or wines on tap, for me, I want to tell you about the reason why we have Venom Pinot Noir on, because I actually got to go to a wine dinner and I had the winemaker there telling me about how he and his partner maxed out credit cards in order to open this winery, and they went all in, and they were just in love with the Pinot Noir grape, and they found a great place that sourced. So where I'm going with this is that I'm telling you a story, and this is selling it. So I don't necessarily make something thinking this is something people are going to want. I make it because it's like, this is what I want, and I'm going to tell you why you want it, because this is amazing and it has a story behind it.
Okay, we have a question online, I hear.
So we have Rob from Facebook who's asking the question: any good sources for used up old barrels for their staves?
Are they looking for used barrels themselves or just the staves?
I'm not sure. We'll wait for Rob to reply.
Okay, because I don't know about Andy, but I do have a bunch of used barrels that I can't use anymore because of what I've aged in it. So, like I said, I'm not a gin guy by any means, but I ended up doing a single grain whiskey and I aged it in used gin barrels. So it's very interesting. It's got gin aroma, but it's got the whiskey flavor and whiskey bite, which really messes with your senses. You smell it, you're like, oh, this is gin for sure. But then you taste it, like, nope, that's not gin. And then I've done barrel-aged soy sauce, barrel-aged hot sauce. And those barrels, I'm not going to throw anything in because I'm not going to take a chance on a salty whiskey.
Oh, you don't?
So...
We don't have a lot of barrels that we dispose of right now. Because we have the winery piece and we have the distillery and the brewery, we're kind of like playing. So we'll empty a whiskey barrel and we'll fill it with beer. And then we'll have another whiskey barrel that we'll fill with wine, or we'll have a wine barrel and we'll fill that with something whiskey or whatever. So we're doing lots of playing around. There are, I would say, I'll bet a bigger operation like a Flag Hill probably has spent barrels that they're not doing as much with or would be willing to part with.
It sounds like this person's looking for something for our craft project, so it's not for actual distilling or making.
So if they're looking for barrels like that, they could definitely reach out to me because I do have multiple barrels that I'm not going to use. Plus, I have a barrel that I disassemble to use as a showcase piece. I wish I had time to bring stuff, but I'm not as good as Andy. But I do have staves just laying around that I'm not using anymore. So if they're looking for something like that, they can always reach out.
Okay, the next question is over here.
Hi, you've brought this wonderful apparatus here. It looks great. Could you take 5 minutes and explain all its attributes and how you use it? What do they do?
That's you. I'm going to get a beer.
Thank you.
You want to give me a reposado, Herrador? Okay, thank you. Yes, I guess we probably should have started at the beginning here. Distillation, what is it, and how can it benefit you? So we've decided upon some sort of a type of a wash. We have sugar water, more or less. So what we do here is we have our still. This is an 8-gallon still, and it's got a few different components that all exist on the still that we have at Doire. So what you do is you put your alcohol wash into the still, and you start to heat it. As you do that, alcohol starts to vaporize, and that happens around 160-ish, 62 degrees. That's when you start to get the nasty stuff. And then it eventually works its way up to about 174, and that's the choice stuff that you want. So anyway, we start to heat our wash up, and the vapor starts to come up. In this particular setup, the way I have this here, I've introduced a gin basket. Hold on one second here. We can take this apart. So if we're making gin or we're trying to create a lemon drop cocktail, what we do is we stick our botanicals inside of a basket that hangs over our alcohol wash. So as the alcohol vapor comes up, it infuses the flavors of whatever's sitting in that basket, and then it continues to make its way up. So not everybody has a gin basket. This just happens to be the way that our still operates. We don't always have a gin basket in there, but we can hang one over. It then makes its way over, so we have a separate column, which is called a reflux column. And we have several different windows, and inside of those windows, where did it go?
Against the back TV, Andy.
Oh, thank you. We have copper plates. They're just kind of a very silly little wingding that sit inside of here. And what happens is, the reason that stills are generally made of copper is that it attracts and pulls out a lot of the terrible things that exist in alcohol, sulfur being the most major one. So it'll stick to the copper plates. So our still has 5 of these that are about yay big, with a whole network of things that look like this. So what happens is the alcohol vapor makes its way up through, and some of the nasty stuff clings to it. It also cools the vapor, and it drops back down again while it's continuing to be heated. And then it makes its way back up, and it hits it again and drops down. It hits it again and drops down. But it continues to heat the entire configuration, and it cleans and polishes the spirit. This is in my still. This doesn't necessarily exist in every still. So we go up through this network of copper. Up here, we have a temperature sensor, because it's important to know what the temperature is here, but it's also important to know, just as we're about to get to the point where we're going to run off distillate, we want to kind of know where things are at here. So you see all of this is copper. So this is continuing to polish the spirit. And then we come out here, and what we end up in is something called a parrot, which would sit here. In most stills, it's built in so that, it's part of the whole unit. And then that's where it starts to show us what the alcohol proof is. So that's kind of like a very quick kind of summary of the way our still works. If you look at different types of stills, André talked about doing a stripping run. So I'm assuming that your still goes up, over, and there's a condenser, and that's it.
Yeah, my first still is exactly that. It's a glorified pot still. So a pot still is you got your kettle, an arm that goes up, and then going into a condenser, and that's it. Pot stills can be all different designs. They can look all different, but they all essentially do the same thing. Pretty much with the still, all you're doing is taking a liquid that has alcohol in it, heating it up, turning it into a vapor, and turning it back into a liquid. That's it. That's all it is. And within the last 2 years, the FDA came out saying that spirits, as long as they're not flavored accordingly, they can all be now considered gluten-free. Right? Before that, the FDA didn't say you could do that, but the gluten protein in grain will not pass in a vapor. It's when you start adding your flavorings, that's when you can have issues. So yeah.
Yeah, so this is kind of a weird, convoluted situation here, but with what André said, you have a pot still, which is basically you go up and you go out, and that's it. You're taking the raw alcohol, and then you can do another spirit run, which is where you water down your spirit and then you run it back through again, and it cleans it up, polishes. Same thing. So with our still, we do one run most of the time where we run our whiskey wash through. It comes up through here. It polishes the spirit, and then we take that and we barrel age it, or we do whatever we're going to do with it. Trying to think if there's anything else that is relevant.
What kind of dangers are involved with that process and fire?
Tell you that right now, this is one of the most important pieces that he has on this still. That right there is a pressure relief valve. I don't know about you, but I get a lot of hobby people coming in asking about doing stuff, and that's the number one thing I always recommend, because you don't know. In theory, you shouldn't have anything in here that could clog something up, but when you start doing gin, there's also that possibility that something could get clogged up, and it's a pressure vessel at that point. So having this is a safety factor.
Alcohol vapor is very bad. I'll tell you a quick story. It was when we first started doing this, and Abe, American Beverage Equipment, didn't provide any sort of instructions at all with operating their equipment. So it was trial by fire almost. And my wife is always trying to make me healthier, so she's like, we need to go to the chiropractor. I'm like, we have the still on, so I don't know when this thing's going to start doing its thing. She's like, no, it'll be fine. Yeah. So we got back, and we're hearing wee, 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 and that's the automated alarm that was on the so André talked about the condenser. So when the spirit, the vapor finally comes over to, we have a third column, the condenser. It's cold water that runs up through to turn the vapor back into liquid. Well, when we had left, we didn't turn that on. So when we walked into the production room and we're listening to this sound, there was a cloud of vapor around the still. And this isn't, not this one, the big one. I'm pretty sure I shit myself. Because it's like a spark will just take that, and then that's just gonna, it's bad news. So our still is, it's electric with an oil bath, and it's insulated. There's no open flame or anything. So when, we have a lot, so many people come through and like, oh, have you seen that show where they're out in the middle of the woods? And yes. And every time it makes me freak out, because it's like, they have open flame there. What if there's vapor? Like, this is going to be really bad. So that, I think, so, André talked about the pressure relief. Yes, that's a huge thing. Also, you can't just stand around and drink and think everything's going to be okay. You do have to be very vigilant and make sure that everything is operating and everything is being cooled properly. For me, the scary piece of, I've seen vapor twice in our distillery since 2018, and every time I'm sitting there in a panic attack, because that's scary stuff. And we even have, we've got a whole, we're bomb-proof. Don't even get me started. There's no fire department here tonight, right? So we have all these precautions there, but when you actually have alcohol, and when you walk into a room and you smell and you're inhaling alcohol in that way, it's scary. So if you were to make your own essential oils at home, you still need to be aware of the fact that you have alcohol, and if you are not cooling that down, you have vapor, that's bad news. Cheers.
So on that happy note, we can get one of these $9.99 on Amazon.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you can actually. Maybe not this one, but you can.
So a lot of what you're talking about is great for, the clear spirits as far as vodka and gin and things like that. But when you start getting into the golds, like the brandies and the scotches and the whiskeys and all that, obviously you need the help of the barrels. So I guess, and you talked about having the barrels before someone was asking the question. But it's not just a simple barrel. I think there's different types of oaks, different types of woods. So can you guys explain the types of barrels that are out there, the charring process, how do you decide which one you want to use as far as barrel aging your spirits?
So every country has their own regulations for certain things. So for Scotch, it has to be made in Scotland. America's thing is bourbon. So to be a bourbon, it's got to follow all these different guidelines. But the biggest thing is it's got to go into a brand new American white oak barrel, and it's a one-time use to be called a bourbon. They do make different size barrels. You can get a 1 gallon barrel all the way up to a 53 gallon barrel. I'm not sure what size you're running right now, but I started out with 10 and 15 gallon barrels, then moved into 30 gallons. Now I'm doing 53 gallon barrels. The barrel size compared to the amount of alcohol going in it can change the flavor. Because there's a certain ratio between the amount of liquid and surface area. So for any alcohol that you go to the liquor store and you see the wording straight on it, that means it was aged in a barrel for 2 years minimum. Didn't say what size barrel. Aged in a barrel, all right? Now, bourbon has to be in a brand new American white oak. But as long as you don't put the word straight on there, it could be in that barrel for 30 seconds. Come out, still look like that, and be called a bourbon because you followed the guidelines. But for like a 10-gallon barrel to be a bourbon, to get the same flavor profile as a 2-year-old barrel, you're probably looking at maybe a 10-gallon barrel, maybe 9 months compared to 2 years for a 53-gallon barrel. Whereas a 30-gallon barrel, you're looking at a year and a half to almost a year and 8 months to get the same thing as a 2-gallon barrel. So here in America, it's only basically American white oak. In New Hampshire, there's not a lot of New Hampshire white oak around. Most of New Hampshire is red oak. There used to be a cooperage in Fremont, New Hampshire. They closed down, I want to say, in the 80s, early 90s that they closed down. I actually have made my own barrels out of American white oak, and that was one of the things I wanted to get into is making barrels for other places, but the raw material for around here is not the greatest. So you can't make a barrel out of red oak. You can't make a barrel out of cherry wood. Well, you could, but it probably wouldn't be advantageous because I don't know of any place that does any real weird woods because the wood can affect the alcohol and there can be bad things that happen. Whereas like in Scotland and those places, they're using used American bourbon barrels or they're using sherry casks or port wine barrels and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know about what you're doing for barrels.
I guess part of it, excuse me, Rob, is what are you trying to do? So we've done everything from using new American oak that is a 30-gallon or a 15-gallon to using X Irish whiskey or X bourbon barrels, things like that. So, for example, our agave spirit, we have 2 reposados that we released, and reposado is basically it needs to be in a barrel for at least 61 days up to a year. We left it in for just over 90 days. We had one of our ex-rye whiskey barrels, which was when we put the rye whiskey in there, a brand new white oak barrel. We put that spirit in there. We knew that we were going to pick up flavors from the whiskey and maybe some subtle pieces from the oak, but we weren't going to leave it in there long enough so that it was going to really take advantage of anything that had been in there or the oak itself. We have Irish whiskey right now that's sitting in 2 different 30-gallon barrels. We have 2 different X bourbon barrels that the whiskey is sitting in. I found that when we've done Irish whiskey in the past, putting it into a bourbon barrel creates a nice vanilla note that kind of underlies in the Irish whiskey. And then also, if we, again, you know, how long are we going to leave it in there? Our Irish whiskey's been in there for about a year. Part of me wants to pull some of it because the two barrels, they were filled at the same time. They were similar types of bourbon. One has matured much differently than the other. The other needs a lot more time. The other one's like, damn, this is actually pretty good. We could probably put this in a bottle. So I guess, you know, as far as like cooperage goes, it depends on what you're trying to do, what flavors you're trying to get. And the beauty of that is that you get to taste it all the time. And, you know, it's like, this is the hard work that we do, is that, you know, you have an idea, you know, you create a whiskey recipe or whatever it is you're doing, you put it in a barrel, and the only way to know if it's ready is this something I would like to drink? So you get to try it all the time. So I guess, again, to go back to answering your question, as far as cooperage goes, what are you trying to do? And then that kind of determines what type of barrel you get. And one side step to that is also there are wood treatments. You can get oak staves, or you can get cherry staves, or you can get hickory staves, and you can soak your whiskey in that, and that creates flavors too. There's also, I had a guy, as an English guy, coming in. He was several beers deep, talking about his own, unofficial distillation processes at home, and he was talking about this setup that he had where he was vibrating the hell out of a small barrel for hours on end for months, and that was speeding up the aging process. So I'm going off on a tangent. This is what happens when you drink and you try and have a conversation on a panel. The whole thing about putting stuff in a barrel is you get flavors and you pull out impurities and add flavors through the growing and the shrinking of the barrel. So temperature, obviously, when it heats up, everything expands. It pulls the whiskey into the barrel. And when it gets cold, it puts it back into the liquid. So this is where you're getting your flavors from. Again, there's so many variables that go into creating spirits. It really comes down to what are you trying to create, and what do you think people are going to buy, I guess, at the end of the day.
Okay, Dan?
Okay, in the back on your right.
Thank you for everything, and I can't wait to try a couple of those up there. But about 5 years from now, what do you hope? Where do you want to sit? Like if you were here 5 years from now, what will you hope to have accomplished or done that you haven't so far?
Okay, so for me, I'm a one-man band. I do everything from running the still, doing the brewing, running the business itself. And my ultimate goal is to be able to make this my full-time job, because this is actually my fun job, as my wife puts it. So I work a regular full-time job during the week to pay the mortgage and make sure the wife doesn't divorce me. And then at nights, I'll be doing stuff for the distillery, whether it's doing tastings or doing the business side of things, which no one actually really tells you about, that you spend a lot more time doing the business than the fun stuff as distillation. And then on the weekends, I'm at my distillery from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. So my ultimate goal is to be able to make this where I'm actually doing it my full-time job, and I have two employees. That's all I'm looking for, is 2 employees, and be able to survive off that, and for people to enjoy what I make. That's my ultimate goal, is just to keep growing and eventually doing more and more and more. That's what I would like.
I know. Most of you don't know me, but I make a lot of bad choices. I do. I think it wouldn't be a bad thing to have one of our products that we really care about picked up and aggressively supported by the state of New Hampshire. And by that I mean the people that buy the product. We're in an uphill battle, André and I and everybody else who's an independent in the state, because the state of New Hampshire is a control state. So they take a lot, and they also they want to support the big brands because the big brands have the money. So it would be cool to create something that people were like, yeah, I need to stop by and pick up a bottle of that, and that would be fun. And something, I brought gin tonight because I love the limitless possibilities of creating gin. So I think if someone were to pick up, or the state liquor commission were to pick up our gin and be like, this is killing it, can you create this to the cows come home? That would be super cool.
Great. Questions? Okay, we're going to take advantage of the lull right here. Obviously, these guys know what they're talking about, and they have a great deal of camaraderie. We'll test that a little bit. So, André, would you like to ask Andy a question?
Yes, I do have a question for Andy. Okay, so we talk about the state. I'm not going to say too many bad things about the state because they don't treat us smaller guys. They don't do any favors for us compared to some of the bigger distilleries in the state. But one thing that I have been trying to approach the state about doing is doing the canned cocktails that Andy has been doing. And with the state, you always got to make sure you get stuff in writing. So I've been going to the state since April to get an answer of what I can do and what I can't do. And they say one thing, and then I pose a different thing to them, and then they say a different thing. And I want to just a breakdown and a guideline of what I can and cannot do under the license I have now. So how did you end up working it out with the state, either between Jim or Amy? These are employees of the state. And yes, I am using their first names. How did you work it out with them? Because you're still doing it under your current distiller's license, right?
Yes.
So how did you work it out with the packaging size and the ABV? Because I can't get them to tell me the answer that I'm looking for, which I think I know the answer, but I want to see what they told you, or even if you went to the state and how that went.
It's confidential. No, I specifically asked the state because I've seen so many cocktails that are in like beer stores. I'm like, how the hell is there a vodka cocktail drink in a beer store? Because if anybody knows anything about the state, it's a control state, and they hold the monopoly on liquor in particular. They're willing to bend with wine and with beer, but as far as liquor goes, that's theirs. So all of a sudden you have beer stores that are carrying cocktails. A cocktail that can be available in a beer store or supermarket, whatever, has to be within 6%, I want to say it's 6% and no greater than 8, I think. I can find the email on that. So it's somewhere around there.
Nope, you're exactly where I have done the research and know certain things.
We didn't want to go down that road because there's 1,005% margaritas.
Correct.
And who the hell wants a 5% margarita?
Correct.
We wanted you're right. We wanted a full strength cocktail. We wanted you to literally be able to go, boop, it's in a glass. Done. So you can do that. The feds rule this territory. So you cannot have a canned cocktail greater than 12.5%. That's what all of our cocktails are. But as far as the state of New Hampshire is concerned, if you were above the 8% mark or whatever it was, you are alcohol at that point. And you are ruled by the state's rules.
Correct. So when I was talking to the state about this, and after spending all night doing my research, what I came out to find with the state, not the feds, but the state, if I produce a product between 6 and 8%, and it goes into a container less than 16 ounces, I need to get a separate license, which is called a beverage manufacturer's license, which means I, at that point, would be able to sell to the beer distributors, and they would be able to sell it to the Cumbies, the Shaws, those type of places.
That's correct.
If I do a product between 6 and 8% over the 16 ounces, I'm still covered under my license. But that's a 750 milliliter bottle or can. What's that? 40. Yeah, well, yeah. 75 or 16 ounces. Yeah. And if I did a product, 8.1%, doesn't matter the container size, I would still be under my distiller's license. But I can only sell it to the state or in-house only.
Correct.
And the biggest, I don't know about Andy, but the biggest problem for me is when I walk into a gas station and I see the display of Buzzball drinks. I'm sure everyone's seen what I'm talking about. Those are 15%. Yes, it is wine. But when we're at such a small, lower ABV, what does the state more care about? What it's made from or what the ABV is? That's what I would like to know. What do they care more about?
This sounds like a conversation to have with your organization, sir.
Yeah, well...
The New Hampshire Distillers Organization?
Yeah, I ain't going there with that.
Yeah, I'm not either, but that would be... Those are the people.
Yes.
Do we have another question? Yep, Rob.
So the one that wasn't covered so far, I'm just kind of curious, liqueurs. What does it take? Have you ever thought about making liqueurs like a Grand Marnier or Kahlua or things like that? And what does it add? What kind of processes are added to the process of distillation to make things like liqueurs?
So liqueurs is alcohol with a marmalade, in my eyes. It's a very low proof, sugary alcohol. When you start getting into the milk products, that scares me a little bit. Because if you don't package it correctly, that can go bad. So I stay away from the Kahlua type drinks and those type of things myself, because I'm just scared of something going bad very easily.
I'm with André on this. I don't want anything that's going to spoil, but we do wine. When we got our latest shipment of juice, we took 265 gallons and we fermented that specifically for distilling so we could create brandy. We've also done small test batch stuff with wine because I do like the idea of having our own Grand Marnier because it's essentially an orange liqueur and wine kind of combined with a little bit of sweet. So it's not that difficult. Everything that we do, regardless of what we want to do in the state, it has to go through federal approval. And as long as we have our process in place and we have our formula mapped out in a way that robots can read, because I'm pretty sure, unless anybody's from the TTB here, love you. Thank you for coming out tonight.
I have words.
Yes, yeah. As long as whoever the formula person is for the TTB approves it, then it's a thing. So it's, I guess, as far as liqueurs go, it's already hard enough to get into everything that we're trying to do, whether it's gin or it's whiskey or it's vodka, trying to get into the state and trying to make a difference. So to try and go an offshoot, I think is tough unless you're somebody who Phil. He's done an amazing job.
Fabrizio?
Yeah, Fabrizio. Oh my God, he does amazing stuff. He's actually, that's kind of the way he's gone. I actually don't even know if he distills, but he
No,
packages
so
what he-
there's
yeah.
two different ways you can get into alcohol. One is getting a distiller manufacturer's license, which we both hold. The other way is getting what's known as a rectifier's license, which is buying alcohol from someone else. Could be us, could be a big manufacturer. You bring it into your facility, blend it, bottle it, do whatever you want with it, and then you have to sell it wholesale. You can't do any retail sales. You can't have a tasting room or anything like that here in the state of New Hampshire. And that's what Fabrizio, they end up doing. So they have their limoncello. They have a whole line of all this different kinds of stuff. They're pretty big here in the state of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I believe they're the number one limoncello sold in Massachusetts. And they're right here in Salem, New Hampshire. So
what is the logic behind not you have to sell it wholesale and not retail?
Because to get what's called GNS, which is grain neutral spirit, these big guys that are producing it at 200 gallons an hour, they're selling, say, a 55-gallon drum for, say, $2,500. For me and him to produce 55 gallons of
190 proof. I
yeah,
mean, it's high octane.
It's high octane. The cost alone for us to produce that is 50 times of what you can buy it. So it's lucrative to buy the alcohol out and then do this. But here in the state, they kind of made it so that way you can't. So how many people here, Zenka? You know Zenka? Really cheap vodka? That was bottled in Londonderry, New Hampshire. All the Zenka in the state was bottled in Londonderry. Three Olives, Pinnacle, all those big brands, all bottled in Londonderry, New Hampshire. So what you get, J.P. Noonan, the big tanker trucks, they roll up to a side of a building with a hose, hook it up to the building, they pump the alcohol into the building, they just a giant bottling facility. And all they do is bottle it. And the company that does that, I won't give out their name, because I don't like them too much. But they have multiple places throughout the U.S., and that's all they do, is they just bottle stuff and then sell it. Because that's their thing is quantity over quality. We're quality over quantity. I'm sure Andy will attest to this. I know I'm not going to become a huge millionaire doing this. I just want people to enjoy what I can create. And just keep coming back and getting more of it and telling their friends about it, and just supporting us to get us out there. Because a lot of my people, that customers that come in, I want to say it's about 85% word of mouth. Then it's about 10% of Google search. Then 5% is social media, and that's it. But most of it's word of mouth. So.
Great. Any other questions? Okay. Sorry, I got to climb over there.
So you, when you're aging the product, does it matter? Like, do you always use the wood barrels, regardless of what spirit you're aging? And then you mentioned temperature. Do you fluctuate the temperature depending on what it is that you're aging? You had said when it's colder, or when it's hotter, it pulls it into the wood, or I'm probably getting that wrong. But so do you purposefully fluctuate temperature to affect the taste of whatever it is you're aging? Do you use, maybe you don't use wooden barrels? Do you use plastic or aluminum or anything other than wood also?
Excuse me. We let the seasons and the actual temperatures do the work. We don't have a facility where we have any sort of major temperature control. So when it's summertime and everything expands, cool. And when it's wintertime, everything contracts. There are certain parts of the country which have really high highs and really low lows, and those are great because that just sits there and it does this all day. We're at a disadvantage, I think, as far as aging spirits in this part of the country because we have seasons, but we don't have this massive flux in temperature, so it doesn't necessarily help us out. I know there's other processes that we could do that we're too small to take advantage of those things. As far as other vessels, the only time that we would use a vessel other than an oak barrel or whatever would be the wood treatments that I mentioned, where you have a stainless steel vessel or a glass vessel, and you have whiskey in it, and you drop a whole bunch of cherry wood staves into it or whatever to flavor the whiskey. You're not going to get any benefit from aging a spirit in anything other than a wooden vessel. So, this bottle of gin is going to taste the same way 1,000 years from now, I hope, as it does today. There's no reason that there's nothing affecting this. Maybe light might do something to it, but when we're talking about barrel aging stuff, it needs to, so when you have whiskey in a bottle, it doesn't get stronger. It doesn't change in flavor. It is what it is. So in order to change the flavor, you need to have that in some kind of a wooden vessel or in something that has another treatment that's affecting that whiskey.
Okay, any other questions? Well, then let's have Andy. Why don't you ask André a question?
What do you want to know?
I didn't know this was going to be a thing. I know. I have so many questions. How does your wife put... No. What is your favorite thing that you make to make? Like, what is it? What do you love to... Like, when you have a day and you're like, yeah, I'm doing this thing, what is it?
So what I really love to create is whiskeys, because like I was saying earlier, with different grains, it can change the flavor, and then throwing it into a barrel with either different chars or toast levels, it'll change the flavor profile so dramatically. But the problem with whiskeys is called a cash flow problem. So you make a whiskey, you let it sit in a barrel, and you look at it, and you just keep looking at it day in and day out. Well, that doesn't pay the bills. So you do have to create all these other products to give interest. But my biggest thing is I really love to create whiskeys, and the one whiskey I really, really love is I make a wheat whiskey. Wheat whiskey is totally different than your other whiskeys out there. The flavor profile on it is so different. It's not a norm. When you go to the liquor stores here in the state, you see your aisle for bourbon, your scotch, you see a section for rye. You'll never see a section for wheat whiskey because it's not very popular. The wheat whiskey that I make is done with a winter wheat. So they're planting the wheat couple weeks ago probably, and then it sits over winter, and then it'll grow in the springtime. The flavor profile, it's very earthy, and it changes on your palate as you sip it. So, and it'll linger for a really, really long time. And it's totally different than my bourbon or even my single malt that I made. So I really, really enjoy wheat whiskey because how different it is. And there's not many out there at the liquor stores either. So.
Okay.
What about you? Bring it back to you.
What's your favorite drink?
The one that's in front of me. But bump. Yes. Well, that's the beauty of making beer, wine, and booze is that I don't have to worry about any of those things. I really like anything that's infused. So I guess that's why I brought gin tonight, and we need to pass things around. I actually brought all of the botanicals that are in this gin. I also brought poison, so everyone can smell what poison smells like. But I love the idea that you can take a base spirit that doesn't really taste like much, and then you can. Same thing. Like you tweak a certain amount of ingredients in this. If we pulled a little bit more lemon peel and a little bit less of the orange peel, completely different spirit. So I was never a gin person, but as soon as I started playing around, I'm like, oh my God, we have an infinite number of possibilities with super flavorful things that we can do. So I think that's probably my favorite thing, playing around with gin.
So going on the whole infusion thing, though, I've had a request to make certain things. I don't know if you've seen this yet. So my wife wanted me to create a lavender vodka. One time we went out to dinner, and she had this lavender cocktail, but it was made with a simple syrup. And that's the one thing she didn't like, is made with a simple syrup. So she wanted me to make it with real lavender, make it a vodka. So I ended up doing a few different batches of this, and I did one with a little bit of lavender, then a little bit more, then I did one that was truly excessive. And I'm a big believer in no matter what you buy for spirits, I don't care what the cost is. You should be able to drink a glass out of that bottle, either neat on the rocks, be able to appreciate what that product is. If you can't do it, it's not worth. I don't care if you spent $300 on it or if you spent $6. But I do understand people have to mix things. But this one that my wife chose, being the god-awful, how heavy amount of lavender that goes into this, I'm a man of my word. I did that with this lavender vodka. I will never do that again. It's one of the ones that I make that I really try. No, if you like whiskey, you will not like this. Do not try this. And people think it's a sales tactic. No, I'm telling you, you will not like it. And then they try it. They're like, yeah, I don't like this. I know. I told you. And then the other one is doing a pickle vodka, which I would highly recommend doing something with gin with a pickle. Because are there pickle people here? Because there is a crowd out there for pickle. I don't know what it is, but people like their pickles. And that one's halfway decent, but it's still one of the things like, really? But hey, people enjoy it. And you can infuse all different kinds of stuff.
Did she like the lavender?
Oh, so during the summertime, I work Saturday and Sundays at the Distillery. I can tell if my wife had a bad day with our kids, because we have 2 little kids. She'll send me a text Sunday saying, bring home a bottle of lavender for the week. So she has a pitcher, one of the rectangular Brita filter things. She doesn't use it for filtering water. She puts a bottle of lavender vodka and a bunch of lemonade in there, and that stays in the fridge. And she just taps it all summer long. So that's what she likes. So, yeah, she enjoys the lavender vodka immensely. I can't do it.
Okay, are there any other questions? I'm going to change the end of this in that case because we do want to get to this. Normally we ask one question. If there's anything you would like everybody to take away from this, what would it be? Andy?
I don't know your name, but I like you already. Yes, I would like you to take away gin samples. Like I said, I brought botanicals around. I would love for everyone to pass those around. I would love you to pass around the poison. Put your nose in it. Don't sip from it because it will kill you. And then also share some of the gin that I brought. And if you're not a gin person, that's fine. I guess I went into this with no expectations. I love Rob and Stacy, and Rob asked if I would like to be part of this panel, and I'm like, wait, so I get to go out and not work and have some drinks at Margaritas and talk about drinks? Yes, I think I can make that work. I hope that, I guess, like, one of the things that we try and do in our tasting room is we try and we want to educate people, and not to the umpth degree, but we want to, like, have people have an idea of, like, what goes into making a spirit. There's so many people that have no idea that when you distill, everything is clear. There's a lot of people that are like, well, why isn't it brown when it comes out? And, going through that process. So we talk about that. So I guess these types of events are super cool because I hope that you take away a new appreciation for when you're imbibing whatever it is. If you're having the cheapest bottle of vodka, or you're having something that you spent $300 on, don't buy Pappy Van Winkle. It's a waste of money. Experience. Then you at least you have a new appreciation for the fact that it's like, we go out and we drink and we, get stupid and whatever, but it's also like there is a lot that goes into this, and there is science and there's math and there's all that sort of stuff. But there's also, at some point, whoever created certain brands started out as a small producer, and they had an idea for something, and they figured out how to create something consistently. This is why, so Josh brought me some Bud Heavies tonight, and I'm super appreciative of that, because at some point, no, stay with me. They figured out how to productionize a beer and make it consistent. And if there's one thing, my own experience, I watched Jim Cook talk about the fact, Sam Adams, he was talking about the fact that Budweiser does something that nobody else can do or hasn't done well to that point. And that was to take a product and make it consistent across the entire country, across the world. So it's super cool. It's one of those catch-22s, like, we're craft, we're tiny, we're small, and hope that you guys walk away with like, oh, this is cool. I got to go check out Andre's place because he has a whole bunch of cool whiskey and he's doing like crazy, like lavender vodkas, and he's got like hot sauces and stuff. We got to talk about that. But he's putting stuff in barrels, and that's cool. And hope with it, yes, this cool stuff. And then maybe you're like, oh, you know what? Andy Day sounds like a drunk, but you know what? I'm gonna go check out his place anyway because his wife sounds cool. She is. She's awesome. So I'm hoping that you walk away with that, but also the fact that like you appreciate the fact that if you're drinking Doire's White Label or you're drinking something that came from either one of our distilleries, there's a lot of heart and a lot of passion that went into that, a lot of science that went into that, and that you hold up that glass just before you're ready to order the next. You're like, this is pretty good, and these guys are great. They're doing a good job. So I guess that's what I would hope that people would take away from tonight.
Okay. André?
Yes, kind of what Andy said, but next time you guys go into the liquor stores or next restaurant you go to, just ask what they have for New Hampshire products. Doesn't matter if it is my product. I hate to say it, doesn't matter if it's his product. But as long as they're trying to carry New Hampshire type products and helping there's all little guys. There's only 2 big guys here in the state. Everyone else is little. As long as they're trying to help the little guys out, that's all I can ask, because at least it's getting out there. Because yes, it's a lot of work. Just trying to get our name out there, getting people to try it. Because when you walk into the liquor store and you look, hey, what do I want to buy?
Tito's.
Yeah. You look at it, whole thing of Tito's, whole thing of Tito's, whole thing of Tito's, whole thing of Tito's. Oh, there's a live-free vodka, 1 slot. And so it just helped promote us because we are small. And we are just trying to make it in this world. Would love for everyone to come by both of our places, try things out. You definitely be surprised on the quality of products at his facility, my facility, everyone else's facility in the state. Because there's one here in Nashua, Andy's in Derry, I'm in Manchester, there's one in Concord. We're all over the state, out by Keene, out by the seacoast, way up north. Oh yeah, Tamworth, there's Cathedral Ledge. So yeah, definitely try to support local as best as you can. That's pretty much where I want everyone to come with us.
Well, on that point, if everybody wanted to come and buy some of your stuff, where would they go?
So for my location, I'm located on East Industrial Drive in Manchester. So I'm right off exit 6 on Candia Road. If you're familiar with that area, the name over there was Wayne's Glass, right at the corner. Wayne is no longer around. That business is closed, but it's that building right there, right at the corner, right in the center of the building.
Okay, Andy?
We are at 1.5 East Broadway in Derry. We are smack dab in the middle of downtown Derry. We have our restaurant, Cask and Vine, so you can actually make a night of it if you want. At the restaurant, we do try and carry local New Hampshire distilled spirits.
Tell them what you have to do for your stuff.
Oh. Nobody here from the Liquor Commission tonight? Nobody here? Okay,
So
cool.
you guys will not believe what he has to do to serve his products. I'm telling you that right now.
So we have our restaurant, and then we have the production side, which is distilled spirits, beer, and wine, all under the same roof, same building. We actually put a doorway between the two spots. When we have a distilled spirit, after we go through the nonsense with the feds and it's approved, we need to contact the state and fill out their form and get a code that allows us to sell our product to the state to the tune of we get 50% of what retail value we designate. Then, as the restaurant, we get to buy it. So the way this works out is it takes this last time I sent a form in for it was actually our agave spirit. I sent it in on August 29th, and we just finally got approval 2 days ago for these two spirits. So that means that there's codes in the system. So now, 2-3 months later, we can contact the DHL warehouse and say, we'd like to schedule a delivery time. And they're like, okay, when do you want to come up? Yeah, 2 days from then. So then we bring it up to the state or to the warehouse in Bow and drop it off there. We wait 24 to 48 hours for them to check it in. We can then order it through the online state system, wait 24 hours, drive back up, and pick it up so that we can bring it back down. And we can serve it at the restaurant at the tune of the fact that they took 50%. And then on top of that, obviously, as the restaurant, we have to mark it up whatever the retail is because that's what you do. And then you fine people get to pay 8.5% on top of that. God love the state. We can. We need to talk about this, sir. This is why if your organization isn't doing the job, then we need to talk, because there are actually state representatives that have done an amazing job at trying to create parity with other states around us and deregulate. So we are in a control state. So many of the laws that exist alcohol-wise in this state they're like pre-prohibition laws or just after prohibition. So it's
I got a great story about that afterwards.
We have so many stories. They've started to allow things to happen. We were not able to do anything except for pour free samples of our spirits in our tasting room up until just a few years ago, and then we were able to start charging for them. The crazy part is that when we could do it for free, One, nobody wanted to. Wait, what? What's the catch here? I can just drink spirits. Two, if we have 12 SKUs, I can't pour you the same one twice, but I can pour you all 12.
What?
So you're telling me that I can drink 12 half-ounce pours, but I can't have that same one twice? That's crazy. We have recently been able to start pouring cocktails as long as we had food service in our tasting room. So we have that. I mean, this is such a slippery slope. Like, we could go down the rabbit hole about the Liquor Commission and the way that it operates in this state. And I hate to demonize them, but I love to demonize them because they're
horrible.
I mean, the Liquor Commission is in place to make money. It's a huge revenue source. We don't have an income tax. We have the Liquor Commission. So what are they going to do? They're going to get in bed with certain brands, and they're going to do what they're going to do. So this is another reason why this is a cool opportunity to talk with people and be like, hey, this is actually what is happening with spirits in New Hampshire, and you're not necessarily going to get this because the Liquor Commission is pushing Tito's or Captain Morgan or Crystal Skull Vodka, or whatever the hell it is, Casamigos. I could go on. The list goes on. But, we're super appreciative for you guys being here. You have a story to tell. I'm going to shut the hell up because I'm talking too much.
So back to Andy's talking about prohibition-type laws. When I was getting licensed, so I spent a good 10 years getting all my ducks in the row, making sure I have everything. So when I sent in my federal license, hopefully it would be a seamless process, because before 2017, 2016, there were stories where it was a 2-year wait to get licensed from the feds. And you have to have your establishment, you have to have your equipment, you have to spend all this money up front before you can even produce a drop of alcohol. Well, they've eased up on certain things. They changed from being a policing force. Now they're a tax force, and they want these industries to come in because it's just money pouring in from them. So I sent in all my paperwork. I got my federal license in less than 30 days, which is really unheard of. So then once I got that in, I'm like, oh, crap. Now I really need to start doing my build out. So me and my buddy spent the entire summer of 2018 every single night after work, and then every single weekend doing the build out, doing everything. And then once I got to a point where the city came in, did their inspection, I could get the state to come down to do their inspection, which was kind of a joke. Right. So they came in, they're looking at it. It was an enforcement officer and someone from the auditing department. Won't say names. They're looking around. They're like, you don't have any bottles. You don't have any grain. You don't. Yeah, because I don't know if you're going to tell me I can do this or not. I'm not going to spend all that money and you say, sorry, you can't do it. And because of I built all my equipment, I purchased stuff secondhand from Craigslist. They were asking me, okay, do you have serial numbers and this, that, and the other thing? I'm like, well, yeah, kind of, but I put the serial number on there. Oh, well, do you have receipts for stuff? Yeah, I have a receipt for a stainless steel sheet, 4x10 that I bought that I made this with. Oh, well, when you come up to finalize your paperwork, all I want you to do is have an affidavit stating you own everything to make sure. This is the exact words that came out of the gentleman's mouth. You'll know who I'm talking about. We just want to make sure you're not owned by the mafia. And I'm like,
what's his name, James?
We won't go there. I'm like, really? That's still a thing in 2018? You guys are still concerned about that? I'm not, but apparently they were, and that just blew my mind.
Considering all the Hennessy we sell to New York, you'd think they'd want the mafia coming here.
Oh, weird.
So that's another thing that really gets my goat. I'm sure it gets Andy's goat. Here in the state of New Hampshire, they put limitations on what we can sell to the general population. We cannot go to the restaurants and bars and sell directly, all right? They have to go through the Liquor Commission. That's a whole different story. But for the general population to come in, I can sell to an individual 1 case of alcohol, 750 milliliters, 9 liters, whatever you want to call it, per day. but I can only sell up to so many cases a year to that individual. The State of New Hampshire Liquor Commission, the way it works with them is you can buy as much as you want, right? But if you buy more than $10,000, it has to be reported to the IRS. So I'm sure you've been to the liquor stores and you've seen a U-Haul truck and another vehicle side by side, and these people are going in and they're spending $8,000 and then wheeling out a giant thing. Next person goes up, spends $9,500. Same thing over and over and over again. They load up the vehicle, and whether or not they go to a different store or they go to a storage locker to empty it, then go to a different store, can't say that for sure. I don't know if I've ever seen it, but we'll not talk about that. But yeah, they allow people in the state to come in, buy whatever they want, as long as they don't say don't spend over $10,000. They recommend spending less than $10,000 because within the last 2 years, the state stores, all the state stores, have put in cash counters, cash machines that counts the cash. They've done that for a reason. And the number one store that sells Hennessy is in Chesterfield, New Hampshire. The number one store in New Hampshire that sells Hennessy, and it's the largest Hennessy distribution facility in the country for a reason.
Wow.
You got any more to add to that?
No, I think you got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, we're just going to, the end stuff. We are not doing a Science Cafe in December. We normally take that off anyway, so the next ones are right there. Thank you to the audience. Your questions were great. Thanks for being here. You guys were outstanding. It was entertaining and educational. Can't ask more.
Thank you very much.